Welcome to Dronecast, Rethinking Public Safety One Drone at a Time, a podcast by DroneSense. We explore real-world applications of drones in emergency response, offering a close examination of evolving trends in drone technology and its impact on public safety. I'm your host, John McLeod, Director of Customer Success here at DroneSense. Hello, and welcome to Dronecast. I'm your host, John McLeod. Joining us today is our friend, Matt Rowland. Matt is an 18-year veteran in the Fort Wayne, Indiana Police Department and the program administrator of the Air Support Unit. Matt was a founder of the Fort Wayne Air Support Unit back in 2017, making him one of the pioneers in innovating with drones in the public safety space. Figuring out how to be successful, or even what success looked like, was very much starting with a blank sheet of paper at that time. But over the last 7 years, their program has blossomed, and currently the Air Support team has 10 members and 30 to 35 drones in the field, has expanded into drone as a first responder, continues to innovate and look over the horizon, and to define and optimize using technology to improve situational awareness and save lives. So welcome, Matt. It's wonderful to have you. Thanks for making time to visit with us today.
Hi, John. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. So we will lead off with, I always like to kind of take everybody back with programs that are established. So take us back in the Wayback Machine to 2017. You're a negotiator. Lieutenant Bowers brought you and your team in and says, congratulations, you're UAS pilots now doing overwatch on SWAT calls. So how did that come to be, and what did you feel about that moment?
Well, I'll take a little step back even from that. Lieutenant Bowers had the foresight to see the need for drones and actually said, I was on the negotiating team, like you said, and he actually had the negotiators go to ground school in 2015 because there was no such thing as a Part 107 until 2016. So his thinking ahead was even kind of ahead of the curve, where he wanted to figure out how we could do it and be legal about it, but there wasn't like an established type of licensing through the FAA. So everyone went to ground school that was a negotiator, and then as it kind of progressed, it was decided, well, we're going to start a drone team. There is a Part 107. They took two people from the negotiation team. One was me and another officer who were more interested in technology, I guess you could say. And then there was two certified pilots on the police department. And so that's where they kind of came up with the four of us. We kind of started flight operations at that time, but it was still kind of indecision on if we were going to be an actual thing or if we were going to be part of negotiators or kind of where it was going to go. So the decision was made by command to actually make it a team. And then they told the four of us that we had to interview for the team. But so you're on the team, but you got to interview to be on the team. It was weird, right? Like you weren't sure what was going to happen. So we interviewed, and as it came about, all four of us were selected for a team. They added a fifth police patrolman. And then the sergeant actually that had started was Sergeant Bowers at the time. He actually got promoted to lieutenant in the process of all of this. And then we had a sergeant that was added to the team. So the four of us became seven of us in the official team. And so that was super exciting to be a part of the team. And the two of us that had started on the negotiating team were still on the negotiating team as well. So we were actually wearing two hats for a while.
Now, at that time, to your point, there wasn't a lot of structure, right? The technology is in a very different place. Did they sell you on the application of the technology? Like, what were you thinking? Like, we're doing this because what are we going to get out of it? Like, how is it going to help us in our mission?
So Lieutenant Bowers, his actual thought process initially was start small and do overwatch for barricade situations.
Gotcha.
So that was kind of the birth of the team, really was just doing overwatch when the SWAT team was called out. Now that happens here about 12 to 18 times a year, depending on the year and how active it is. So it wasn't a ton in the beginning, and it wasn't until later that things kind of got added on.
That makes sense. So you've been in this road for a while here. So I guess that's 9 years actually now. You've accumulated a lot of experience. You probably had to create the process. You had to learn things through trial and error. There's a lot of resources out there, but still it's intimidating, right? You got a license from the FAA. I got to buy this hardware. I got to learn how to use it. I got to think tactically in public safety about how it's applicable to our mission set. What kind of advice or reassurance can you give somebody who's maybe being voluntold, almost like you were, to kind of get a project off the ground. How do you help them feel better about those sort of things, even though it is hard?
Well, I would say now that the process is a little bit easier because there's lots of different training that you can do. When we started, there wasn't a playbook. There wasn't all these resources. There was a program that we went to that they called training. But once we got involved with it, we really found out that they were just kind of, I don't want to say fly by night, but they were more involved with training kids with like hot air balloons, kind of like science projects, maybe. I struggle with it because the training was not great. But what they were seeing that could be accomplished by training police officers to be drone pilots, they saw that. They just did not do it very good. The training, I mean, all the four of us that went to that would tell you that the training was not that good. But they saw that it was there. They just didn't plan it out and lay it out. But in their defense, there wasn't anything to play that off of, right? So we're all learning in this process. And now you've got all these different places that have all these different trainings and classes, and you've got folks that have been involved with drones for 5, 6, 7 years that have their knowledge out there. Conferences. The first conference we went to was not even a drone conference. It was a helicopter conference that sort of had a drone element to it. And now we've got specific public safety drone conferences we can go to.
Yeah, that's been really great. And having gotten to attend a lot of those too, the resources for new programs not only are documents and know-how, but the relationships you have with other agencies who've been there before. Somebody can call up, and I'm sure you're one of those people who get calls and say, like, I have just run into this. Have you been through this before? Because I don't want to learn a lesson the hard way. But it makes me kind of think back to those early years of your program, probably starting what you're talking about, barricaded suspects. I see with a lot of programs because overwatch is kind of the most intellectually simple way of thinking sometimes about using drones in public safety. I put a camera up in the sky and I can show people a different perspective that gives me this capability I haven't had before. And I imagine first you have very limited ability to share video back then too. So it's you looking at it, maybe you're relaying it verbally, maybe you're doing this with the controller to tell people what you're seeing. How much that has changed for you? Like, what innovation have we seen? Has it really moved the needle when you're doing those kind of activities today?
So our first drones were the unique, I've actually got one on the shelf here in my office, the 6-prop Typhoons, I think is what they call them. It had an HDMI out on the controller, and negotiators had just got a brand new 32-foot command center, a bus. It had a TV on the outside with HDMI input. And we would take a second controller and basically be the co-pilot to the first controller and shadow what that drone was seeing. And we could then pipe that into the bus, and that the bus could put it on their screens. And then they ran a line over to the SWAT team. And so that was the earliest rendition of getting video from the drones so that everybody could see it. There was no wireless anything then. We did move from that into a wireless kind of a mesh system, but the video was not HD, so it was analog. It was very secure because it was more of like an internal network. And then we went from that to another program that things didn't quite work as well. And then we had a drone crash. And we struggled with that. And then Lieutenant Bowers, I don't even know where he found it, but he found this company that you had heard of called DroneSense. And that was kind of the beginning of really moving video around and wirelessly cell connections. Those early days, I think it's all been LTE, but even the early days of LTE, moving video around and using the right iPads. We had iPad minis, which didn't have a lot of power in the iPad itself. Once now, of course, we're either on an iPad Pro, 5G, we're using 5G Verizon boxes to pump that out of smart controllers. And so now we just had this conversation the other day about how reliable video is now compared to what it was then, and the cutting out and always trying to reconnect. Man, now we're spoiled, especially when you look back 5 years. to trying to move video around. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest advances that I would say overall is the ability to move that video around.
Yeah, we talk a lot about drones produce a lot of data, but you need information to make decisions. And so if you don't get that good quality video, you're in a tough spot pretty quick, right? Then you've just got this camera in the sky that's in the way. So
I remember we went from the Mavic Pro and just moving that video around, and we bought a 210. And the 210 had the dual gimbal setup on it with D30 and the XT2. And trying to process that video to move it over a data stream because it was so much heavy lifting. And, we're using iPad mini. Well, the Crystal Skies got thrown out the window almost immediately because they didn't have any horsepower. The iPad minis were better, but man, once the iPad Pro came along with that, I don't know, what do they call that chip?
M1, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the M1 chip. That was a big game changer.
Yeah, I mean, the pace of the technology in tablets and miniaturization that's fueling drones and lots of other technology space is amazing. The applications people have been able to use. I mean, when you think about the power you have in your pocket right now to access information and share things, it's just remarkable. Kind of following that thread on Overwatch, one of the things I know you and I have talked about before, and I've talked about with a lot of other people, is it was just interesting, particularly if you go back to like 2019, 2020, beginning of the pandemic, right? And we entered into this interesting time period of kind of a conversation and a renegotiation between communities and sometimes public safety agencies about kind of what they expected and owed from each other. And it kind of overlapped with George Floyd protests and a lot of political protests and marches in the streets. And it was interesting because it's a great thing to be an American and have this active democracy where we have those conversations. Like, that's fantastic. But when you have protests and counter protests, you have just this inherent tension, right? And public safety plays a big role in kind of keeping everybody safe and making sure everybody goes home, right? At the same time, I know you guys really did a lot of work, or one of many agencies around the country who had some really interesting experiences in there trying to make sure everybody gets home okay, but at the same time using that technology to meet that end. Can you tell us a little bit about what that experience was like for you? Because I think they're really informative.
So the protests that we saw here were something that we had never seen before. From that first weekend to the next 3 weeks, we used drones extensively for overhead watch of the events that were unfolding. We were able to use the drones to track where people were moving, potential supply lines. There was 100 folks that were arrested that weekend, and there was video captured by the drones that weren't captured anywhere else that was able to be used as evidence for some of those charges. I'm not sure how much exactly specifically I can talk about, so I'll just probably leave it at that. I can tell you that our program was instrumental, and the protest was one of the things that really helped propel our unit and build a lot of momentum. The mayor did a walk with the police chief and other community leaders during one of those protests. My sergeant at the time walked with the chief. So that kind of put me in the hot seat for controlling video feeds in our emergency command center. And we were flying at some points up to 5 drones at a time, keeping constant coverage, moving drones in and out. I remember it was the 210 and then a bunch of Mavic Pros that we were swapping in and out for the walk that they made from like where the protests were to a bridge for what they wanted to express themselves about.
Awesome. At some point, you guys kind of looked at everything you were doing, and I think had the idea that occurred in a number of different communities, a number of different agencies over time, which was really moving into using drones for calls for service, drone as a first responder. When you look at your community, as I recall, you guys have about 250,000 people, and you thought about your needs. What is it about that convinced you, like, hey, this could really help us here? And how did you get other people to share that vision? Because it's an interesting differentiation between kind of business as usual sometimes.
Yeah, so for us in the drone first responder program, or DFR, DSR, whatever you want to call it, the police chief came to us and wanted to do it. This was something that he saw that he thought would be really good. It wasn't anything that we really had to do a hard sell on. he wanted us to do it. And so we said, well, we're going to have to take some steps to try to figure this out. Even as far as originally, there was talk that maybe a VTOL, like a Dragonfish, might make more sense. As we discussed that or researched it, we did eventually go with the 300s. But he was very supportive with us, and he wanted to know why we were doing what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. One of the other things that I had to talk through with my sergeant and the chief was that it was going to require us to add another person. I'm full-time to the team, and we have now currently 10 pilots, as you mentioned. I have a sergeant that's in charge of the team. And then I needed another full-time officer. I said, there's a lot of other things that are going on administratively from everything that we work on and do. We got to add another person. And so we were able, through that process, to add another full-time person to the team.
It's interesting as you think through DFR and DSR specifically to DroneSense. When we talk to agencies that are going down that path and they're starting to build a budget, they're starting to think about kind of the broad strokes of a program, resourcing becomes very important very quickly, as with every program. You got to pay for it. You got to have manpower. You got to have equipment to do a thing. One of the, I think, surprises sometimes for some folks is when they look at it, they think, well, software, equipment, accessories, that's going to be the biggest part of the budget, but it really ends up being personnel most of the time, because as we all know, if you have one, you have none.
Right.
So you need at least a couple of people right on there to make this thing happen, because people get sick. When you give people advice, because you've been to the Chulas of the world, you've talked to other people starting DFR programs, like when they're thinking about that specifically, because it is such an abstraction sometimes from kind of Overwatch in particular, where do they need to get started? Like, what's the most important first step to kind of get those things off the ground, to set expectations internally, to get the resources you need so you're successful, so you're not choked off from the beginning?
Well, the whole thing that I learned in this process is that everybody kind of looks at DFR, DSR, drone first responder. They all look at it kind of differently. Everyone's got, so when we did a site visit with Chula Vista in June of 21, and they basically started their program as a DFR program. We have a very robust, what I would call a tactical program, or a drone in a trunk, or however you want to call that. And we fly almost every day. We have lots of experience from that. But the DFR, when we start looking at different programs, it's different for everybody. So that's probably when people ask me about starting a program, probably one of the first things I say is that it's not the same for everybody. Go to Chula Vista, come here if you want. Go a couple other, there's, 20, 30, 40 DFR programs running now. Go to them, talk to them, and find out what seems to make the most sense for you. Because for us, it's doing it one way. And then Chula Vista, essentially, we did our DFR based on the program, but their start is different because of it. That was their program, was DFR. And they can cover their entire city in 4 launch locations at 52 square miles. We're 110 square miles. So we got a lot more space to cover. So we're still flying the drone downtown and responding to radio runs, but a lot of times we might be handing that off to a tactical side. Whereas if I'm not doing DFR, I might take a drone and go out there and help cover whatever that is, versus where Chula Vista might just cover it with the DFR drone. It just, every circumstance is different. But I get a lot of questions about budgets, and it's a hard question to answer. Because again, however you're going to manage your program, some police departments have to figure in salaries, they have to figure in overtime, they have to figure in when it comes to each individual department. For us, that's all budgeted separately. So while it is a concern, when we do our budget for our team, we don't do a budget that says, well, Officer Rowland's going to make this much money, and that's got to be a part of the DFR budget. That's all separate. Our cars are all separate. We do have a couple of vehicles for our team, but that's still managed through the fleet budget and not managed through our budget. Essentially, most of our things that are budgeted for are drones in general and setup, even for paying for third-party software like DroneSense. We don't have to necessarily budget for that specifically, because that can be done through, say, the software of the city there's different ways to look at different parts of that budget when it comes to trying to figure out how much it's going to cost. So that's what I try to explain to folks is it might be different for you depending on how your city budget's done, because anybody familiar with a municipality's budget knows that there's all kinds of line items. There's a line item for this, a line item for that, a line item if you spend this much money, a line item if you spend less than this much money. So it's a hard question. People are like, well, what's your budget? And I'm like, well, I can give you an idea or a sense, but if you ask me what my budget is, you ask Chula Vista what their budget is, it's a lot different because they are including different things in their budget than we might include in ours. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. It's kind of a long-winded answer for what's your budget.
No, that does make sense. So, you guys are kind of in this category, I think, is kind of prototypical first adopters of technology. Like you have a good mind and creativity around, hey, I see this tool, and maybe this is an off-the-shelf way to use it, but I can see how it can really help, right? And you guys have a great mind for that. When we're looking kind of in the near term, there's a lot of stuff about docs that's happening that I think people kind of understand at this point, though the new generations are coming so fast. It's like before you can get your first generation, the second generation's for sale. It's just wild. But if you look a little further upfield, are there things you wish that existed or things that you see that are coming that you're like, oh man, I can't wait for that to get here because that's going to really move the needle for us, that you get excited about or just wish that existed in general?
So without specifically answering that question, I guess that the one point that I like to bring up, you mentioned docs. And as we move forward and look forward, I think we got ahead of ourselves with docs. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that the forward thinking of not just our department, but other departments in, hey, there's this doc and it was released to do more surveying or things like that, or patrols of the private property or whatever. Public safety looked at it and went, hey, that would be perfect for what we want to do. And so now you're taking a doc that initially wanted a 10-minute setup to fly the drone, and you're like, I want it to launch in less than a minute. So it's overall, we tend to start trying to push those limits of things. We're doing it now with trying to not have a VO on top of the roof. That's kind of the next step as we look at docs. Well, how do we make docs work? Well, we make docs work when we don't have to have somebody on the roof, and we've got some kind of an airspace awareness where we can see the airspace, and then we don't have to have that person on the roof. It goes back to manpower. We mentioned earlier, manpower is always a thing. Well, if I don't have to have a person on the roof, then I can have this technology that sees the airspace and makes it safe and deconflicts it. And now I'm moving forward, right? Like if you would have told me 2 years ago that we were looking at doing a doc and trying to push the process of not having a visual observer on the roof, I would have been like, no way, that's not going to come about that fast. And yet here we are, like we're here. So it's hard to stay ahead of this technology. And as we're pushing for better, newer stuff, I would say the one thing that we wish we could have would be better American-made drones, because we know that that's a huge discussion right now in the industry. The struggle is there to find American-made drones. So we're always I got a phone call last week about demoing a drone that actually not an American-made drone, but also not in the whole Chinese band mindset. It's from a different country. So we're always looking forward for ways to be able to kind of push the envelope. What's the newest, latest, and greatest? We've had lots of demos of lots of things over the years as we kind of push forward. I think AI is going to come into play here too. I hope that we can keep AI good. We think back to Terminator and bad AI, and it's here. And I hope we can make good use of it, because where I've seen it used good, it's amazing how much we always say we wish we had a second person. Like sometimes I wish there was two of me so that I could get twice as much done, because there's just not enough time in the day. And AI started to help people with that and helping to fill in some of those gaps. But that's I think that's exciting to look forward to for us, expanding our program with DFR, the goals that are out there in the next couple of years is having more than one drone in a box, more than one dock, we talk about fire stations because they're geographically located across the city, looking towards what that means and where it's going to go and how many docks can we have. So then you look at how many people do you need to fly, because how many people are going to be able to manage docks, right? For our city, 110 square miles, we have 17 fire stations. So you put one on every fire station, but then how do you manage that with whatever your airspace awareness is? Are you going to have a bunch of sensors? Is there better airspace awareness, whether it's visual or radar or whatever that answer is? And then, of course, it's all expensive. So you got to weigh that too, right? Like, I know what a patrol officer costs to have him help me with being a visual observer, or even if it's me being the visual observer that day. But the technology, as it grows and we expand, then you start talking about DFR, because right now we're only doing it 8 hours a day. So you go to 10, 12, 14 hours a day. You start looking at it at night. Right now we're still Monday through Friday, but that's kind of the next step too, is looking at, obviously, crime still happens on the weekends. So that's obviously another thing that has got to be looked at and addressed. Does DFR does our team continue to kind of encapsulate DFR and the tactical side? Is there kind of a movement to go one way or the other? These are questions that are just discussion points right now, right? We're just things to think about, like where we're going and what this is going to look like. We try to keep a viable 5-year plan, which always makes me smile a little bit, because if you would have had me do a 5-year plan in 2017, I'm not sure how much of 2022 I could have predicted with the 5-year plan. But you're always changing it. You're looking at it every year. What's the next latest and greatest?
That makes sense. One of the things I find interesting about working in this business, in this space, is I can tell people that I work around drones, but like they don't know what that means, right? It's hard to explain to your least technical relative what it is you do. And so I often think about things in terms of like a baseball card. Like if I flipped my baseball card around and I said, these are my stats or these are my stories that kind of explain why we're doing what we're doing, like what success we've had. If you think about your program, what would that be for you?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I love baseball, and this is like my favorite time of year, where it's spring training. I'm a huge Cincinnati Reds fan. I've been a fan of them since I was a little kid. And I think that, I think it's something to say. We have over 13,000 flights when we started our program. And that's not DFR. That's all inclusive of everything. But we've flown a lot since 2017. I think one thing that kind of sticks out in 2018, President Trump came here for midterm elections, and we wrote an ops plan. Lieutenant Bowers wrote an ops plan that was about that thick. And we believe that we were one of the first state, local, municipality police drone programs that actually flew overwatch for a city president. We got all the waivers to fly in the TFR. We got everything that we needed to make all that happen. That was pretty big for us because we had 1 year as a program. That was pretty awesome to be able to say, hey, we flew a drone. We learned what the technologies that are on the president's limos with cutting out communication and cell phones. We learned what that does with drones, and the drones were disconnected but came back. That's a pretty big highlight. And then we're the first DFR program in Indiana. So I would say if we're going to put 3 or 4 things on the back of our baseball card, that's also a big one. We did a lot of the research and insight and got a year, and it's something that we've been doing for the last year and a half, and it's been awesome.
Yeah, those aren't small things. I mean, playing nice with other federal law enforcement or administrative agencies that have acronyms for names can be very challenging. They have their own way they see the world too. And that's a big thing to plan for. So kudos to you guys for that. I'm sure that was ahead of time. Probably you had some moments where you're like, I got to get this right.
Yeah.
So it's a little stressful. As you think about your program now, one of the commonalities I see kind of across our customers is the growing awareness. It's not to say it wasn't there, but it's becoming more and more prevalent of the importance of really doing a great job in public relations and community relations, right? The public can be really nervous about new technology, about privacy issues. The technology is somewhat unknown to them. They may have never actually touched or seen a drone. They just know what they saw on TV or, from their least technical relative on Facebook that's filled their heads with. So how do you go about kind of communicating to the community, hey, this is what we do. This is why we do it. You're in good hands with us. And it's definitely worth our investment of time and resources because it's just making us all safer. Like, how do you guys go about that right now?
We've been very transparent with our program. Depending on the year, we do 30, 40, 50. I think our highest was 71 demos 2 years ago with the community.
Wow.
So we're out there, we're out and about, we're showing folks our drones. We've done everything from community gatherings to schools to libraries to different festivals. We've just everything kind of in between. We've even done there's a program here with our small regional airport where they invite kids in to fly in airplanes. And we've even been able to go there and set up our drones because obviously those kids are interested in flying. So anything that we can do to kind of answer those questions for those kids. And I'll be honest too, some of it's a recruiting tool, right? We know that recruiting has been tough the last few years. So we've been able to use the drone to show folks college age, high school. We do one demo this year that I think is 8th graders. So it's not something that you're necessarily going to see an immediate return in, but it just plants that seed. And so it's over time where you can do that especially with the kids. But the community folks always have great questions and they always want to know, hey, what does your drone do? How high can it fly? Where can it fly? When we started our program in 2017, I've got a picture of it. I've got a bald head and no facial hair. And I look about 10 years younger, even though it was in 2017, where we rolled out the red carpet to the community, to the media, and we introduced our drone program. We said, here's what we're doing. Here's how we're flying it. And then we did the same thing last year with the DFR program. We invited community members in, the mayors, was the assistant mayor, and 2 or 3 city council folks came. Lots of questions, wanted to ask questions. How are you flying? Where are you flying? What are you flying to? And they've all been very supportive of it. We're very lucky to have a community that's been supportive of law enforcement. A lot of things, when people ask about drones flying downtown, which I'm trying to figure out how to phrase that right. We've had some folks that have asked about drones flying downtown and why or where, or maybe they'll call the office number. And as soon as we explain it to them what we're doing and why we're doing it, they're like, oh man, that's great. That's great. We had a call for a suspicious vehicle with DFR a couple of days ago. And the lady had a question about the vehicle. And there was some questions she wanted to answer because she thought maybe there was a crime about to occur. We were able to send the drone. We were able to see the information that we needed to see with the drone. And we were able to call that lady back and it was nothing. And we called her and she's like, well, I didn't even see a SWAT car come out. All right, ma'am, we had a drone come out. And she's like, oh, well, that's pretty cool. Like a drone is able to take care of this. And the greatest part about it is that we didn't have to send an officer. The drone went and took care of it. We were able to keep officers in service for more higher priority runs. The issue was dealt with and we didn't have to send it. We're seeing about the industry standard of 15 to 20% of being able to get disregards. And so community leaders also like that stat because you're able to save resources for other things. We've been very lucky and we're blessed to have the support that we have.
I mean, that's fantastic. I also say I think we're the same age, so we are young men, Matt. We, regardless of our haircuts. So, but is there like a phrase or something you guys have stuck on that when you're talking to someone skeptical that kind of turns the lights on for them that you've found over time that works in particular, or a place you tend to start to kind of get their wheels turning?
I just basically tell them we try to be transparent. And as long as they don't think that you're trying to hide anything, I think that's where some folks that do have a problem is they're like, oh, well, they're trying to hide this. Well,
right,
we're not.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I'll throw this shameless plug out there. The cops, that we grew up with, that we watched.
Yeah.
Cops, Lane Link Productions was here last year, and there's supposed to be an episode featuring our DFR program coming out sometime this year. So that's about as transparent as you can get when you invite me in to see what you're doing.
That's actually really great advice. I mean, just starting by putting the stake in the ground, saying, like, here's how we see the world. We want you to know what we're up to. We don't feel like we have anything to hide because we're doing it for your benefit is a great way to frame that conversation and get people kind of to understand your perspective. So thank you for saying that in particular. That's really great advice. So people listening at home, make a note of that one. That's a good one. I love to ask this question, especially people who are very experienced, which is, I have found when I look back over things that I've built over a long period of time, and I think about what did I do at different times that really made a difference and moved the needle, even if I didn't recognize at the time that decision was going to be really crucial. Like when you look back, is there something that you guys did at the time that you're like, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but man, it was really important later and really was helpful?
I would say that you've got to continue to push forward, and sometimes that means that no might be the answer. So as you start the program, it's not that you're going to get a no, but don't be afraid to ask questions you might get a no answer for. That's one thing that I've learned as you try to push forward is sometimes it makes sense and you don't see it. Hey, you need to pull back a little bit. We've been very lucky to have the support that we've had. Retired Chief Steve Reed, retired Deputy Chief Marty Bender, retired Lieutenant Bowers, and retired Sergeant Brett Mueller have all been the folks that helped get the initial groundwork going for all of this, from tactical all the way up. They had the foresight to see what we needed and where we needed to go. And so that's what we try to continue on with. But sometimes you get to that point where you've got to ask the tough questions, and sometimes you're going to get answers you don't like, but that's what pushes us forward so that we can keep trying. Because like we said before, this is an ever-changing environment.
For sure.
This environment changes every couple of years. Technology, everything changes. So what you think today might be the right answer may not be the right answer tomorrow. So I would just say that don't be afraid to ask those questions. But if no's the answer, then you've got to readjust and move on. But just don't be afraid of that.
That's great. So let's flip that coin over. Is there something that you did that you really regret that you would take back if you could?
There's only really one thing that sticks out in my mind. We bought a drone that was kind of an early blue UAS, all-weather, outdoor, overhead watch drone. I'd like to have that one back and purchase something different. But that's also what comes with trying to be forward-thinking and trying new things and pushing the envelope. This drone goes back to the previous administration, and the DOJ from that administration started to push the Chinese ban on drones, and we wanted to look at things that were potentially going to be the next step. And we bought this drone, and it didn't work out. If I can take that one back, I think the whole team would agree that drone would not be, and it was an outside door, so it wasn't an indoor drone. I don't want anybody to read into what company I'm saying, because I'm just not going to say the company. It was frustrating.
It's a good plan. They'll remain nameless. We'll protect the innocent and the guilty today, for sure. So, I mean, those are all the big questions I have for you today, which means it's time to pass the mic to you for the shameless plug, or tell something you're excited about and how people can get in touch with you. They had questions or want to reach out.
So 2 days ago, I saw a quote that really spoke to me. The quote is, "Unreasonable passion has led us here." And if you think about how we apply that to our drone programs, and it's not just this program or just me, it's in general law enforcement. A lot of the folks that I've met, whether it's at conferences online, they have this unreasonable passion to do what we do. And I think that I don't know, it was just like I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. That's why we're here, is this unreasonable passion for what we do. We have an awesome team. And I'm just going to shout out to Sergeant Brooks, Officer Hickman, Detective Huss, Officer Hollinger, Officer Young, Detective Hartman, Officer Walters, Officer Wadlick, and Officer Johnson. That's our team. And I want to make sure that I give all of them a shout out too, because this is a team effort. It's all of them involved. And we are on Instagram at pound
Nice.
FWPD ASU or the @ FWPD ASU. And you can reach us. We do have an office line. That's 260-427-2385. And then I have an email if you want to reach out directly as well. Matt, Matt.Rowland ROWLAND at cityoffortwayne.org. Maybe you could put that on the bottom, or well, I guess this is.
We'll put it in the episode notes. Yes.
There you go. In the episode notes.
There we go.
Yeah. However the podcast thing works, right?
Absolutely. Well, Matt, thank you so much for spending time with us today. We really appreciate you, not only as a customer and a good guy, but for all the work you do in your community, keeping people like us safe. It just means so much to us. Thank you, everyone on the internets, for listening to Dronecast. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dronecast, Rethinking Public Safety one drone at a time, is brought to you by DroneSense. To find out more about DroneSense and how our comprehensive situational awareness platform can help you fly, share, and manage your drone program, please visit DroneSense.com. That's DroneSense.com. And then make sure to search for Dronecast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that podcasts are found. Please don't forget to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at DroneSense, thanks for listening.